All right, what is going on, everyone? And welcome back to the Mets Weekly Podcast. As today we are live at this very moment on YouTube and on X to discuss the latest news and rumors all spring training long in Mets land. But before we do that, I want to remind everyone to subscribe to the Mets Weekly YouTube channel for weekly episodes of our show that are now recorded live every Monday night, typically at 7 p.m., even though we are currently live at 5:30 p.m. Not usual, but there was some scheduling that we kind of had to shift this one over. For those of you watching or listening on playback, you want to join the conversation in the future, make sure to turn on those post notifications to know when we go live. For those of you in the live chat right now, we love reading your comments. We love reading your questions, your concerns. And if you feel like you're being ignored, you're not being ignored. We'll just be starring them throughout the show. We'll try to pull up as many as we can to keep the flow of the conversation going. Make sure to follow Mets Weekly on X and on TikTok for future content over there. For our audio listeners, make sure to follow us on all of your favorite listening platforms to not miss the audio version of our new episodes that go up at 9 a.m. the following day of recording. Also, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. That would be greatly appreciated. So, obviously, right now, going into spring training, very, very close to opening day as we start to inch closer and closer. Like we have said pretty much every single time, there's points of concern regarding the health of these players, and it keeps continuing to pile up. Frank, you're here as well. I mean, obviously they'll work around it. There's 162 games that need to be played, but it's starting to get a little bit tedious even before opening day starts, with a lot of injuries that we are starting to see week by week, day by day as well, because there's been multiple throughout this week.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get into that. And it's not even like these contact injuries. It's just like these things just kind of flare up. They just happen. Like they just, oh, this guy's out for a month. Oh, this guy did something. Like it's just, you never know when you're going to hear the next injury report. So that definitely is just a really bad sign. And like we said, you're in spring training. You're not even in the regular season yet, where the workload, the way they're having you go about playing the sport of baseball, it's not nearly as strenuous as it usually is. Like a lot of times they're easing guys in, they're slowly building them up. Eventually, as the preseason goes on, you're playing more innings, you're getting more at bats, you're playing more frequently. And, despite how slowly they move these guys along, you're still seeing so many guys have injuries. So that definitely is a big point of concern. And I don't want that to be the storyline of the season. I mean, obviously, it's still early, but just a lot of injuries. It just feels like every week you're losing multiple guys at this point. I mean, you're looking at the opening day lineup, depending on how some things shake out. I mean, almost half of it is like on the shelf right now. I mean, it definitely
Yeah.
is just really not what you want to see at all. And even then, it's like a lot of guys have limitations. So, I mean, you saw it say with Brandon Nimmo, he's not ready. Like he's not, he'll be there on opening day, but he's not going to be an opening day form. Like he's going to be rusty. So, I mean, that's the other part of it too, is that even though it's not these major season ending injuries, it's still, like you said, tedious, where, you have guys in and out of the lineup, and he has to DH this day. And, it's like they have to restart spring training for a lot of these guys. And that really is kind of frustrating, where not everybody is kind of on the same playing field. Some guys are ready to go, other guys slowly working their way up, just not on the same page for all the players.
Yeah, I'd say that it's definitely a slowdown, and it kind of gives you a little bit of a fear of how is this going to look like in April to start off, because last year they did get off to a very, very slow start. Let's not forget them starting off 11 games under 500. A lot of it had to do with them fundamentally and just kind of adjusting to some workloads for pitchers. Right now, the pitching has definitely been on display fairly well, and we will get into that for a lot of guys on this staff. But I would say that, these guys continuing to get hurt, it's great that you have had more of an emphasis on depth from David Stearns, but there's only so many hits that you can take until you get somewhat of a worry. I'd say that we're going into opening day with, I mean, you're looking at the 40-man roster, and I'd say at least 15 guys have injury concerns. They have an IL stint, or there's just floating up in the air of them being very slow pace in the middle of March. So there's definitely some things to be worried about going into the year, and maybe it subsides throughout. But I would say that, you're going to see some guys on the opening day roster that maybe you did not expect whatsoever because of these injuries. And that really will start with the catching position, like we have talked about with Francisco Alvarez. You might see you may see a reliever or two that is out of options that they put on there, mainly because they're of the slowdown with Danel Nunez, who we saw actually make his spring debut today. So we'll see what the pace is with that. We have some injury concerns going into this year. And, we talked about things going right last year. Staying healthy, I guess, is right now the main point of emphasis. And right now, it's not going great. I feel like every single time that I wake up or look at my phone for the first time in the day, because I look at my phone around, I don't know, 10:30, 11 o'clock every single day for the first time. And I feel like I need to, cross my fingers that we don't have an injury update. And I feel like every single episode we have done to start off spring training, during spring training, every episode that we have done, we have started off with a singular key injury report of somebody who most likely will be on the opening day roster, but most likely will not because they're going to start off the year injured. So it's very frustrating as to where you have to pivot. And it sucks. Put the team in bubble wrap when they're not on the field at this point. But is that even going to change anything at the rate that they're going? Who knows? And guys get hurt. That's just kind of how it is. But to see it in spring this early, it does raise some concern. You can't say it doesn't.
Yeah, I feel like it's definitely very concerning. Pretty much like you were saying, like we open up your phone so like that. Like if you open Twitter and you see Carlos Mendoza sitting in the dugout with his hands on the knob of a bat, that means that there is an injury that he is going to tell you about. Because and we've now seen this with Alvarez, we've seen this with McNeil. Like a lot of these guys, you just see like a video of Carlos Mendoza. He's sitting in the dugout. He's got his hands on the knob of that bat, and he's telling us the latest injury news. Like it's just. He's just waiting. Like he just has something new to tell us almost every day. And every time you see that Mendoza, this is not a good video to watch. Like it's been far too frequent so far.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that, but as soon as you said that, I realized like that's actually true. Like that's actually a trend that has been so far in spring. So I'm glad that we're writing down the Mendoza-isms. I'm glad that that's a thing. That'll become a meme at some point. But let's actually get into some of the latest news that we have had. And of course, we have to start it. Like I have said, what is it? 5 consecutive episodes we have to start it with an injury and how it impacts the roster. And this one goes to infielder Jeff McNeil, who has been dealing with a low-grade oblique strain, which was reported earlier this week, and he will be shut down from participating in full baseball activities for around 7 to 10 days. And McNeil is expected to be out for 3 to 4 weeks and will not be on the Mets opening day active roster. The Mets right now have little to no concern that this injury will sideline him past the middle of late April. But this also brings in come to question of that backup utility bench spot that has been open all camp, with, of course, the talks of Jose Iglesias possibly coming back. He did not end up coming back. Nick Madrigal gets hurt. And then they're kind of talking about moving Beatty to second base, which he has been playing a lot recently. And also, of course, Luis Angel Acuna too. And all of this infield depth or infield surplus that they have had of this entire storyline, which that being, who's going to get this last spot. It looks a little bit more evident now that Beatty and Acuna, both of them, will most likely be on the opening day roster. Regarding any other injury or any other thing that happens, hopefully nothing else does happen because, we're already cutting deep into the depth. My comments and thoughts about McNeil aside, I feel like it's weird because, again, Beatty and Acuna, we know that they wanted to give both of them chances in the major leagues this year. We know that they wanted to see them, particularly Beatty at second base. but also I don't know how a lefty righty, because Beatty left-handed bat, Acuna right-handed bat. I don't know how that's going to work. Maybe it's just kind of like a gauntlet audition thing throughout April of whoever plays well gets more of the playing time. But like, it's kind of hard with one or the other. If they're in the game or the other guy is in the game, who's going to develop, who is going to be able to get everyday reps? That's going to be tough in that way. And that was the main reason as to why we had a question in this the whole time with Jeff McNeil being here, and still here, and, obviously going to be here for the next 2 years, most likely, unless something else happens. Um, you know, again, I don't know what the whole deal is with McNeil and how long this is going to, how long this is going to sustain. Who knows? But Frank, I'll go to you. I know, you're the lone McNeil guy here. Obviously, again, I am not happy that Jeff McNeil is hurt. So for those of you who have been DMing me and adding me on Twitter that I'm happy, first of all, get over yourself. But it definitely raises some questions, let's just say, of these young guys of what playing time they actually are going to get.
We just had the conversation last week. I mean, we had this whole thing. Oh, is it going to be Beatty or is it going to be Acuna? And we shared our sentiment on that. The Brett Beatty fan club came after me for my comments about Brett Beatty. So now they both get to make it. So, I mean, that's the thing. It works a lot of times in sports that when you have these dialogues, any discussions about roster spots and playing time, a lot of instances, these things work their way out. And it happens especially in the rotation. I mean, how many years have we said, oh, who's going to get that number 5 spot? Who's going to get that number 6 spot in the rotation or in the bullpen? And then a guy or two goes down and everybody makes it. So a lot of times these things shake their way out. I do feel that we've talked about our feelings with Acuna is we want to see him get full-time playing time. We've talked about the best way for a player to develop is consistent playing time. And being in a platoon does not do that, especially if he's on the right-handed side. So he's facing left-handed pitchers, which statistically you face less frequently. Now, there are some times in the past where the Mets have struggled against left-handed pitchers, so teams have purposely strategized their rotations against the Mets to feature more left-handers. That has happened, but generally speaking, you're facing more right-handed pitchers. So that means that Acuna is getting less of the playing time. Beatty gets a bulk of the playing time. And I'm not going to go into this whole thing again. What happens. Like I said, Beatty's going to get a shot. We'll see what he does with it. I feel like when we're talking about the position of second base, that is Acuna's natural position. This is a new position for Brett Beatty. So, I mean, we're talking about now, the conversation last week was utility. Now it is starting second baseman. That is the new battle that is apparently happening right now, or platoon that's going to be a thing. I would give it to the guy who's played second base more frequently. I mean, that's just me, but they love Brett Beatty. I feel like this might be his last shot because he's had plenty of opportunities. I mean, this is now a few years. That's kind of my thing with Beatty. It's like there's a few years we've been going on here in the major leagues not being able to be a consistent, productive player. So that was my criticisms. I just haven't seen that on the major league level yet consistently. So like I said, he's going to get a shot and we'll see how it ends up going. I think what's interesting, though, is that the reason why we saw Acuna last year was due to injuries. So McNeil was out and then Lindor went out and then it's like, okay, well, we got to call up somebody else here who's played middle infield. So they called up Acuna. So he came up and he did his thing. And when McNeil got hurt, it was because of a hit by pitch. This time, it's another right oblique strain, same injury that Sean Manaea has. So this goes more into like that overall training as far as like what are we doing in between games to keep our bodies fresh and loose and not getting these like soft tissue injuries. That's something that you don't want to see. Like guys have obliques, they have lats. Later on, we're going to get into calf cramps. You know what I mean? Like these are those kind of things that are done better with like stretching and things like that. So we'll see how that goes as far as how the training staff is performing so far in spring training. Not great, but I think this is something where they'll both get a shot. And we'll see who comes out as the guy getting a majority of the playing time when it's all said and done. Because based off of what I've seen, Acuna, in a short amount of time, I've said this a bunch of times, but in 14 games or whatever it was, he did more offensively for the Mets than Beatty did in like 40 games or 50 games. So for me, I feel like I've seen more in a less amount of time. I've seen more out of Acuna in the major leagues than I have with Brett Beatty. So, I mean, that's kind of how I felt. But like you said, they could start off with the platoon, but let's say that Acuna just completely outplays him. Acuna should get the majority of the playing time. It shouldn't be a platoon. It should be the best players play. We'll see if they do that, but that's kind of the way I would approach it.
I mean, debating it between Beatty and Acuna, I've never been high on either of them, to be honest. But I feel like the basis of things that you either cannot teach or the basis of things that are plus, I'd say that Acuna is just the better guy to be profiled as a second baseman if you're just talking about it strictly from not even just a utility role or just a second baseman in general. Usually the second baseman, even though this has not been a thing for us, usually the second baseman is the shortest guy on the team. Acuna, 5'8", that type of frame. Usually they have a little bit of a mix of tools, but they don't have as strong of an arm as the shortstop. So again, this is the typical prototype that I'm talking about. This is not everything that fits well with everyone. I'm not talking about it in, just perfection percentiles. What I'm talking about it is usually off the top of your head. Beatty, on the other hand, he is 6'2", 6'3", big frame, obviously. Second base, I just don't think that is a great position, even though he hasn't been a complete liability there so far from what we have seen. I still don't think it's something that is his future position. I would probably see him more of a left fielder than second baseman, if I'm talking about that from just strictly position defensively. But the problem that I have with this here is how are we going to mandate this playing time, and how does this help over time with these young players? With Brett Beatty, I kind of put him out of that formula because I feel like I've seen what he can do. And right now, I feel like the best he can do is just off the benches if he is up here. Acuna has not gotten a sample in the major leagues yet. I feel like the overall tools should take the president perfectly. And I'm not saying that Acuna is the guy and he's the starting second baseman, but he's the guy I would give it to. Has Brett Beatty outplayed him in spring? And most likely in that realm, he's going to play over him. Probably because of the right-handed pitching, the righty-lefty. Like you said, you face less lefties. And we'll see who Houston has for us on opening day. Most likely,
we know it's probably Framber Valdez, left-handed pitcher. So
left-handed pitcher. So it could be. It probably could be Acuna starting opening day. We know that there was some talk of Donovan Walton being another guy that's put into the combination, which is kind of just similar to the Wendell Short type of discussion we had last year. Luis De Los Santos was another guy who was on the 40-man roster who was talked about. He was actually in the latest round of cuts, so he is kind of out of that conversation. Right now, they have 44 players in camp at this current moment, so eventually they will be cutting things down as we get closer and closer, which with about, I'd say, a week of games left. So we'll see how that is, figured out. I'm curious to see how the playing time is distributed for a guy such as Brett Beatty, who they want to maintain and give him a chance. And then it's Acuna. Not just visually, just overall fit. I think Acuna helps out this team in the margins. And if he were to bat eighth, it won't hurt you. When it comes to Brett Beatty, he has to hit in order to maintain. Same thing goes for Mark Vientos. Mark Vientos has hit at the major league level. Brett Beatty, he has to hit. That's it. He's not a toolsy player. He is not a, he doesn't have, all of these types of tools. He was originally supposed to be a third baseman, so he has to hit. What he has done at the major league level has not been classified as hitting. He really hasn't. He has been in 600 plate appearances. He has not shown that. I would give it to Acuna, not strictly just because of his overall stats or his overall this or that. I just think the margins are sewn up better that way. I also just feel like, in a ground ball sense, where the Mets have kind of pushed themselves into a lot of these ground ball pitchers, getting outs on the ground and not, overthrowing and trying to get strikeouts. I feel like a double play combination of Acuna and Lindor is a little bit more surefire in that way. Maybe it sounds like I am, overthinking it in that way, but I just feel like it's just a better fit for a guy like Acuna. And I feel like when it comes to Brett Baty, the best way for him to get his stock up in any way is for him to play every day. And I'm not really, after what I've seen in the major leagues, I'm not ready to give him the keys to second base just to keep him here. I'm not just saying that, like, at one point, we talk about Dom Smith before. Dom Smith had a few decent stretches up here, and they were like, okay, well, we got to move him to left field to keep his bat in the lineup. Well, that said bat, if you're talking about Brett Baty, what bat are we talking about? The bat that destroys AAA pitching? The bat that can't hit major league pitching? So again, I'm not trying to sound like I'm just a strict Baty hater. I'm talking about it just from the perspective of what has he shown us at the major league level? And I feel like those types of tools of playing into the margins as well can be something that contributes to this team a lot better, because we all know that the top of the lineup will produce at its best. So the bottom part of the lineup, if you have those tools, you have the speed, the defense, just the overall intangibles of second base, which we know Acuna has over Baty at this current moment because he's played more. So we'll see how they kind of, configure this type of thing. And we all know that filling in the margins was very important to keep the team deep last year. I mean, we all know the main contributor of Jose Iglesias, he wasn't giving us MVP level type of production from all sides, but he was able to fill in those margins when guys were not producing. And one of those guys who wasn't producing already hurt, like we just said. And then we also had some other guys who just were not doing well. And that's why Jose Iglesias was up here. So again, we'll see how that kind of gets played in the way. A lefty righty platoon, I don't know how that is going to contribute, like I said. But we'll get into some of you guys in the chat. I think Goomba is talking about something else, or maybe he's just saying neither of Baty Acuna. I don't know what it is. Stanley saying, I prefer Acuna over Baty at second base. I just think it's built better. I just feel like it's just a better fit in that way. And he's saying trade Baty, which I don't think happens, but I think at some point they're going to make a decision on him, whether he produces or not. We're probably looking at, the final, I don't know, 150 plate appearances from Baty before they make a decision. I'm hoping, because at the ripe age of 25 right now, time is ticking at this point. We've seen 600 plate appearances, and even though people will scream at me that that's not enough and he needs about 10 more years, again, we've seen what Baty has done. And I'm not trying to compare it in the way to Acuna because it was a small sample, because Acuna is not going to repeat what he was doing last year. I'm not saying it that way. But again, the tools can help. Acuna's got the tools over Baty. Douglas Barnes saying Baty needs to play well so he can get traded to the Marlins in a package for Sandy Alcantara. We'll see. I don't know. We've heard things about them liking Brett Baty before. I don't know. But again, I think it all really has to do with what's the timeline for Jeff McNeil, because we know Jeff McNeil will be the starting second baseman. Whether I like it or not, or whether people like it or not, he's going to be the starting second baseman. So once Jeff McNeil is healthy, they're going to have to make a decision between Acuna and Beatty. We know they're going to have to. So I don't know if there's anything that you want to add regarding, the situation with McNeil on that side, but I feel like we've talked about it like way too much at this point. Listen, I'm not here to speculate. I'm not a doctor at all, but I'm just going to bring it up just for the sake of conversation. I don't know if this is trying to add more power or the whole power swing or whatever this is. Did something to the oblique. I don't know what it was. But it seemed like it just came out of nowhere. He seemed to say, Jeff, he basically just said, I just kind of woke up with it. That seemed to be the impression. So it's so weird, this whole discussion. And my feelings again with McNeil aside, I don't know what the timeline is going to be in there. It doesn't seem that there's much concern, but just waking up with it is kind of odd to me.
Yeah, you shouldn't be straining your obliques while you're sleeping. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So maybe the Mets trainers need to go over that.
What if you're getting chased in your dream?
You could. He could have been having a nightmare about you. I mean, I think maybe it could have been. Yes, don't we all? So I mean, that could have been part of it too. But what I'm curious about is that, like, we saw Acuna play well in that small sample size. Let's just say that, and like you said, he doesn't play as good as he did last year, but let's say he plays good again. Not great, but good. And then McNeil comes back and he starts his struggling and just not playing well. How does that look? I mean, because I've said before, but it's like the leash needs to be shorter than it's been in the past, because especially like eventually, Jet Williams in the conversation too. So if you have all these young options and you have McNeil out there struggling, not really getting the job done, you have better things at your disposal. You might as well use it, because that wasn't always the case. Like when McNeil had his bad years in the past, the Mets didn't have these middle infield prospects ready to go to replace him. It was kind of like, well, we don't have anyone else, so Jeff McNeil's got to stay out there, even if he's struggling. I mean, it's a different situation that they have right now. It's a different roster. So if he doesn't get the job done, or if obliques are tricky, like we've talked about it before, but you feel like you're all right, and then you try to ramp back up, and then it comes up on you again. So it's something that they have a timeline set in place, but you don't know exactly. And the same thing is going to happen in Manaea once he's working his way back from his oblique. One's a pitcher, one's a position player. Well aware of that. But when it comes to obliques, these are kind of things that happen.
Yeah. And this is the whole conversation with McNeil of, he's not getting any younger. We know he's not. And listen, I'm telling you, these are the types of things, these types of ding ups, these types of bang ups here, regardless of my feelings about Jeff McNeil, when it comes to the health, this guy shouldn't be playing the outfield. So like that shouldn't be a thought. And I feel like that is not really much of a thought, because they have more depth in that way. And it seems like, Winker and Marte, they'll probably end up going to the outfield before they go to Jeff McNeil. Obviously, with his slowdown to start the season, it's not going to, be even much of a consideration. That's the reason why I just see McNeil now as a second baseman. It has nothing to do with anything against him. It's just the guy's banged up. It's true that he's banged up. He has had a lot of injuries in the past, whether he's healthy or not. There's been ding-ups for this guy for all parts of his body. He's had knee issues. He has had hamstring issues. He has had elbow issues. He has had oblique issues. I mean, there has been all things around this guy's body where it's like he's into his mid-30s now. Like at some point, we're going to have to accept the limits at some point. And that's where I'm like, okay, well, this Jeff McNeil that we're talking about that can play the outfield, that's not the Jeff McNeil from 2019. Like, this is a whole different thing. And it has nothing to do with, whether I'm devaluing what Jeff McNeil can give you. I'm talking about what he can give you right now. And it's like, he's a second baseman. He hasn't played third base since like 2019. He was the emergency catcher when this team didn't even give a shit. I mean, right now, he's the second baseman. That's it. That's it. And we have a lot of left fielders right now before you go to somebody like Jeff McNeil. It's just, you're diminishing it a lot from said player value. But again, second baseman, that's what he is right now.
Yeah, because in the past, your DHs were guys like Darren Ruff, who they did put in the outfield, and Daniel Vogelback, and guys who didn't really play the outfield. But like Jesse Winker, not a great outfielder, but he is your DH who can play the outfield. JD Martinez not here anymore. That's a guy that would not play the field. So like you said,
Yes.
now that Tyrone Taylor, he's going to be on the bench while you already have Jose Siri here. You do have those additional options. And like we said, even Brett Beatty to an extent has played some left field. There was discussions of like Acuna playing center or, so like these guys, there are plenty of guys who could move around. And I think with Jeff McNeil's play style, I mean, what comes to mind is the play he made years ago in Chicago against the White Sox, where like he dove into the netting and that was like the whole flying squirrel.
Yeah.
Like McNeil's play style of all out diving, crashing, like that is not good for a guy who's had injuries. Like putting him out to the outfield and diving for fly balls, like that's how you hurt obliques and banging into walls and stuff like that. So, like you said, I mean, with someone who's had the extent of injuries, outfield is not really a good solution at all.
Yeah, it's only so many bullets that you can take at this point. Like that's kind of how I say it from like the health reason of like he's getting older now. And I'm not gonna sit here and say, well, I just don't like Jeff McNeil and I just don't want him being considered as this valuable piece. No, it's because he's in his 30s now. And like I've said, he has been banged up a lot. He was even banged up in that big career year he had in 2019. I'm pretty sure he ended the year on the injured list. Like he's had a lot of injury issues. And at some point when he continues to get older, because he's going to be 33, 34 next year, I mean, that's not a young, spry age that can be healed by some of these young guys that could possibly be in the outfield as well. It's just like that's how I see it with him. It's like, at one point you got to realize the limits. This McNeil from 2019 is a lot different from the McNeil right now in 2025. And I feel like that just gets viewed as, well, super utility, he has this value. Yes, he possibly could still. And I'm not saying like if he steps into the outfield, he'll automatically get injured. But what I'm saying is at some point when he gets into his 30s, you're going to have to slow this down a little bit. And I feel like that has also been gone unnoticed by the Mets as well with how they've constructed this roster, because they have a lot of guys who could play the outfield. And that you want to have those said fresh legs or primary outfielders over Jeff McNeil. So that whole utility stuff, it gets limited in that way. And also it just doesn't make sense for him to be playing outfield anymore, because we're not in the Wilpon era of, oh, this bat, and we don't want to spend money on anybody. Let's put him in left field. Like we're not in that anymore. There's better resources we can use at this current point for these injuries and for these types of depth charts. That's what a 40-man roster is here for, basically. But as for any other comments on the injuries, I do want to flip it over to you for the injury report of what has been going on. It has been a lot. Now, the graphic I'm about to pull up, I'm just going to tell you guys, originally, actually, this is the right one. Originally, this one had 3 injury reports. Now it has 6. So you can see how it has really been going these last few days in regards to the injury report. So, Frank, it's all yours.
Yes, so we got a lot to get into. So start off with Christian Scott, Mets pitcher, started throwing for the first time last Monday. The 26-year-old right-hander is expected to miss the entirety of the 2025 season, recovering from Tommy John surgery and the additional internal brace procedure he underwent back in September of 2024. Sean Manaea, Mets starting pitcher, received clean MRI results this week and began playing catch in the first step of throwing progression. The 33-year-old southpaw is still expected to begin 2025 on the injured list due to a right oblique strain he experienced at the beginning of camp. Jose Budo, Mets reliever, has not appeared in any games over the past week due to a minor groin issue. Jose Budo did pitch today, though. We did see him in the 8th inning, so that was really good to see. But after throwing a bullpen session on Friday, the Mets do not consider this a major issue. He remains day-to-day. I was glad to see Budo pitch today, though. Tyler Zuber, Mets reliever, exited Sunday afternoon's game after being struck by a comebacker off his right arm. This early exit was strictly precautionary after throwing a test pitch. Zuber is currently on the Mets 40-man roster after they acquired him at last year's trade deadline from Tampa. Ronnie Mauricio. Mets prospect will not participate in spring games and is not expected to start the minor league season on time. Mets manager Carlos Mendoza stated that this is not a setback and they're simply just trying matters at a slow pace. The 23-year-old infielder missed the entire 2024 season, recovering from torn ACL surgery in his right knee, which he sustained during a Dominican Winter League game in December of 2023. Jesse Winker, Mets outfielder, exits Sunday's afternoon game in Port St. Lucie after limping out of the batter's box post-swing. Carlos Mendoza reported that Winker received treatment for just a left calf cramp, and there's currently no further concern going forward. So it's lengthy, but like we
Bullet
said,
dodged
nothing.
right there with Winker.
Yeah, exactly, with Winker, big time. So nothing too crazy yet. Mauricio, I'm starting to get a little concerned here. I mean, we said it. The injury happened December of 2023.
Yeah.
ACLs are tough, but man, they're taking it real slow. So, and that's the
Yeah.
thing too, is that they've taken it so slow that when we're talking about power, where you generate your power from? You generate from your lower half. And if he has not really been able to train his lower half the way he needs to, it's like even Mauricio gets back on the field. In order to get him back at full strength and showing what he's like fully capable of, that's going to take some time as well for him to get his strength back. So it's been a very, that's what's frustrating. More so just sad for the guy because we know the potential that he has, and us not having been able to see it for what's going to be almost 2 years, it definitely is pretty disappointing.
Yeah. One thing I'd say is I'm kind of half and half on this as to where, I wouldn't waste any of the bullets on with, Ronnie Mauricio. I feel like his rehab has to come in actual AAA games so he can ramp up at the current speed before he eventually comes up to the majors. Now, one thing that I will say is, by the time we address this second base position, like we talked about the Jeff McNeil injury and Beatty and on Acuna, by the time Jeff McNeil gets back and we don't have any kind of progression from Ronnie Mauricio in that sort of point, because like we have said, the struggles from Jeff McNeil, maybe they possibly happen. You don't know. Then I'm going to start to get a little bit worried. Right now, I'm just like, okay, well, that sucks. But like, it's 162 games that they need to get through. He was obviously going to start off in AAA no matter what. I obviously view him as my number one favorite to be the second baseman of the future or third baseman, whatever they look at it. Because, this whole discussion right now currently stands of McNeil. It was Iglesias for a little bit, but he's obviously in San Diego now. Acuna, Beatty, Jet Williams. We already know my concerns with him, but Ronnie Mauricio is that guy at the top of the list where I'm like, okay, I would love to see what this kid has. But right now, the timeline is odd right now. They said that, I don't know if it was Mendoza or somebody else. They said that they misspoke when they said that he was going to return in like mid-March, because obviously it's mid-March right now. And apparently they were saying they were going to try, and I guess that just did not come to fruition. So I'm really curious to see what the deal is with Ronnie Mauricio. But as we have said, recovery from the ACL surgery, don't rush it if it doesn't need to be rushed, because it's not like the whole situation with Ronald Acuna where he comes back in 2022 after the torn ACL. He was a key part to that team. We can wait out for Ronnie Mauricio, but it's not like this is going to be, it's not like it doesn't drive up concern. I do agree with you in that, where I'm like, okay, this is slow, which is good, but you're like, okay, we got to see some sort of life here. And there's another prospect as well. We've talked about it. Drew Gilbert, we probably don't even see him throughout spring either. So I don't know if they're just like, okay with the internal options they have right now, and they're just letting these guys slowly recover. But the lack of updates that we have gotten, some concern, let's just say that. And again, another guy on that 40-man roster where you're like, okay, there's injury concern going into 2024. So Yeah, I definitely agree with you in that sense, but I feel like it has to escalate to something else for me to start to get worried, and that probably would be around when Jeff McNeil comes back, when they flip things in and out. So, you know, we don't get a strict update, mid in like May, then we're gonna start to worry a little bit. But spring training obviously getting ramped up. It's not. I'm half concerned. Let's just say that.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, it's more so the potential that he has. I feel like one of the other things you could do too is hopefully Mauricio could be maybe the third baseman of the future and Vientos the DH of the future. Because keep in mind, Winker is on the 1 year deal, so I don't know how long Winker will be a Met, but I feel like what we're hoping is with Mauricio that the bat is so good and Vientos that the bat is so good that you just find somewhere to put these guys. If one is at
Yes.
third and one's at second, if one's at third, one's at DH, if Alonso opts out, goes elsewhere, one's at third, one's at first, like you find a way to make it work because of the potential offensive, especially with the power that both of these guys have. And Mauricio being a switch hitter too also is definitely a nice thing to have too.
Yeah, definitely. And then they will find a way to fit some of these guys in as the line goes off. It's not like not any all of these guys aren't going to be used in utility somehow. But Douglas Barnes saying Mendoza didn't seem too concerned about Winker. Definitely a dodged bullet. One thing that I will say was very uncharacteristic of him. I'm pretty sure that swing that he took out of the batter's box was on a 3-0 count, which is something that you don't see from Winker. So maybe it was, his body saying, we don't do this. So who knows? Odd Villain saying I was at that game in the DR. I think he's talking about
The
the Ronnie
Mauricio,
Mauricio
yeah.
game when he got hurt. That must have been heartbreaking to see that live. You really do hate to see talent go down like that, especially when we know that Ronnie Mauricio in the winter leagues in the past has torn it up. I mean, he really has done very well in the Dominican Winter League, whether you're talking about the height of competition or not. But, it was always great to see that during the winter when, baseball is not played, but it's played year round in the Dominican Republic. So, I mean, obviously, when it comes to, the internal look of things, there's a little bit of a concern regarding Ronnie Mauricio right now. I think we always had it from the very beginning, ever since the injury sustained itself. But it's definitely a long process, and I've talked about it many, many times where I'm willing to wait for him to see what he's got. But I 100% understand the concern as to where ramp up process is a little bit slower than you want. Let's just say that. Is there anything else that you want to add regarding the injuries? Because that's pretty much been the theme of spring of that. And I do want to get into one other theme of spring that we talked that we have all anticipated that happened yesterday, and that being the spring breakout game. And I do want to do a little bit of recap of that game because there was definitely some things that were showcased. And the Mets faced off against the Nationals prospects. It is a farm system, of course, that is pretty high right now because the Nationals are kind of in that realm of rebuilding as of right now. And the Mets were able to snuff out a victory with their prospects. But as for the overall recap of everything, of overall individual performances, as for the offensive side, in the third inning, the Mets prospects would open up the scoring as former 8th-round pick in 2022, Boston Barrow, would homer to left center to make it a 1-0 game. The Mets would follow it up in the fourth with more, following a bloop single by former first-round pick Kevin Parada, another hit by Boston Barrow, and a walk to 12th overall ranked prospect Jeremy Rodriguez. Former second-round pick in 2022, Nick Morabito, would plate 2 runs on a 2-run single to make it 3-0. In the fifth, following a lead-off walk to Mets' second overall ranked prospect Jet Williams, the Mets' 4th overall ranked prospect Ryan Clippard would clobber one to straightaway center for a 2-run shot to make it 5-0. You had a multi-hit game from Boston Barrow, as I said, including the home run. Kevin Parada would rack up a double and a single, Mets' former first round pick a few years ago. Jet Williams would steal a base. Morabito would steal a base along as a part of his multi-hit game. Former first round pick in 2023, Colin Houck, and 2023 deadline acquisition, Jeremy Rodriguez, each would draw a walk. First round pick from last year's draft, Carson Benj, would rack up a double and draw a walk as well. The Mets plated 5 runs on 8 hits, 4 extra base hits, and they went 1 for 7 with runners in scoring position. As for the pitching side, the Mets' 6th overall ranked prospect, Jonah Tong, would get the start and work around a few base runners. He would pitch 2 innings, even 1 hit, 0 earned runs, 2 walks, 3 strikeouts on 9 batters faced. For the third and the fourth undrafted free agent from the Pioneer League, Jonathan Pintaro would get the next 2 innings and work around a few base runners as well, striking out a batter in the process. In the fifth, the second overall, the second round pick from last year, Jonathan Santucci, would come in for the 5th, and the young left-hander would work around a leadoff base hit and walk by inducing a 5-4-3 double play as a part of a scoreless inning. In the 6th, former 13th round pick by the Mets in 2022, Dylan Ross, would toss a scoreless inning, allowing a hit and getting a strikeout. In the 7th inning, the Mets' 8th round pick from last year's draft, Ryan Lampert, would get the 7th and run into some trouble. Following 2 walks and a single, he'd allow the only Nationals run on the day to come across on a sacrifice fly. Final line for each of these teams: Mets 5 runs, 8 hits, 1 error. The Nationals 1 hit, 1 run, 7 hits, 0 errors. And they ended up playing just 7.5 innings because I think the Nationals didn't have as many pitchers. So that's probably the main reason as to why they called it short, because obviously with the Nationals down 5-1, they probably would bat in the bottom of the 8th, but they did not. So very odd how this was all configured in this way. But spring breakout, we did see some encouraging things. Obviously, from the way that it was televised, we did not get any StatCast data from this. So that's pretty frustrating from a guy like me as well. I feel like this could have been presented better. But Frank, I will go to you of some things that you saw overall. Obviously, the Mets farm system getting deeper and deeper as drafts continue to cross by. And we saw some encouraging things. Let's just say that from the offensive side, as well as the pitching side, getting the victory. And also, one more thing, Ryan Clifford was put on the spring breakout first team throughout all of the games that were played. So congratulations to him. We all know Ryan Clifford. We're big high on him. But Frank, what did you see? What did you like? What did you dislike? Were you watching this game live? I saw a good amount of it. I was going in and out towards the end there, but pretty much a good showcase of the young talent. Let's just say, just like last year.
Yes, no, I watched it. I wanted to see what a lot of these guys do because we don't get to see them too frequently. I want to see, Carson Benj. I want to see Jeremy Rodriguez, especially those guys like on the younger side, because you really just don't get to see much of them at all. So, like you said, it was good to see good performances in the pitching and the hitting, especially by your top guys. So, like Clifford being the big time power prospect, you see big time power going lefty, dead center. Great exit velo, great distance. I mean, just the absolute bomb. So that was really, really nice to see. That was the highlight. Parada, I mean, I didn't love the quality of contact, but I just like that he made contact and did something productive. Colin Houck, I mean, first round pick. We haven't seen much from him yet. Didn't do too much in this game. But, the big story for me is, Jonah Tong. I mean, we're continuing to see this guy not only in the spring breakout game, but he's stringing together good start after good start. And last year, he really rose up the system. He was not someone that was in the top 15, in the top 20, but he just pitched so good that he made his way there. And you're seeing him continue that. And one of the guys who we talked about last week, but he pitched earlier than this game, so we couldn't see him, Nolan McNeil. He's been also progressed through the farm system very, very well. So, right now the Mets may have a bunch of number 4 pitchers with the way they're currently constructed, but the hope is that at some point, Brandon Sproat is here, Nolan McLean, Jonah Tong, Christian Scott, and then all of a sudden you have a little bit of a rotation here, and with some guys that
Someone's
got
got
some
a hit,
stuff.
right?
You say one of them's got a hit, and like we've talked about how expensive starting pitching is, because when you have five aces, oh boy, does not everyone just has $1 billion payroll where they could pull it off. So
Yeah.
it's very expensive, as you know, with starting pitching. So, like we always say, if you could do it from within internally, it makes a huge difference to the future success that a team can have, the long, sustainable success that a team can have if you have your young pitchers clicking and healthy. The Mets never got to do it. They had a great opportunity. They had the talent. They just didn't have the luck, so to speak, to have the health. St. Patrick's Day, luck, all that stuff. They didn't have any of that. No leprechauns helping them out to give them the health. So you hope that these guys can get healthy. Scott's got his internal brace, but like we've talked about with Sproat, be careful with those bullets, and we'll see how these other guys, Tone, McLean, how they progress. If Blade is in the mix at some point, hopefully, but then it's just more so of filling in the margins of now we have David Peterson, he's looking better. So we've talked about also the addition of David Stearns, the assistant pitching coach they got from the Yankees, this pitching lab that's being built. This is the way you build that winner that he had in Milwaukee, that they were always, deep in the, not deep, but always in the playoffs. They were always successful. You always have good pitchers that you have at your disposal. You're going to be a good baseball team most of the time. So that is what you want to see them do. And I really like what I've seen from a lot of these pitchers, and even Lambert. I mean, here he comes out of nowhere throwing absolute gas late in the game. So that's what you want to see. That's the David Stearns effect, where it's like we don't really talk about Lambert, not a top 15 prospect, but the guy's in there throwing gas, and you're like, oh, wait a second, who's this guy? Do we have like some other pitchers on the way, hopefully? So, I mean, that's really like where the David Stearns factor really shows up.
Yeah, there was a interview with Ryan Lambert before the game, and he talked about it, how he has touched 102, but he said that he can probably go higher. Please don't do that. But let's just say we know that he has the reliever upside. That's what they expected. Obviously, taking a reliever upside in the eighth round is unprecedented, but we know that the stuff plays. Joe DeMeo, who is one of the big prospect minds in the Mets land. He gave us a little bit of the data that we saw from yesterday. Obviously, without any StatCast, he obviously had to dig a little bit deeper, and he said, the top profile velocity, Jonah Tong reached 98.5, which is something that we saw mid 90s from that guy, and I do want to get into him in a second. Jonathan Bintaro, top 96. We know that he's more of a movement guy. Dylan Ross, who was a Tommy John victim very, very early in his career after, undergoing it, he topped 100. Jonathan Santucci from the left side, 97. Lambert topped 99. So you're definitely seeing a lot of this velocity. Obviously, that is more of the top and not sitting. But there's definitely a lot of stuff that could play in the major leagues if it is applied possibly. One thing, yeah, Jonah Tong was definitely impressive, I will say. He gave up a few base runners here and there. He's still very, very young. He's 20 years old. One thing that I will say, and I think I was talking about it off stream yesterday with you guys, is this guy looks like he's 110 pounds, and the ball just basically explodes out of his hand. And I've heard things of him, the induced vertical break over 20 inches, which is just insane. If you were to get 20 inches of induced vertical break, hovering around 4 with vertical approach angle, I've talked about this before, and he's touching 99. And if he's sitting in the mid 90s, that is an elite fastball. So we also can add in the 12-6 curve that he has, which has over 60 inches of drop. I mean, this is a kid that can definitely have a lot of upside, and definitely somebody that you're going to look out for. Hopefully they, are able to see him go through the system. Obviously, he's a lot younger than the usual pitcher. We don't really have the Doc Goodens who come up at, 17, 18 years old. That's not going to happen. So maybe we see Jonah Tong late next year. Maybe we see him 2027. We'll get close, but he's definitely somebody to keep your eye out on for somebody who's, rise through the system. Ryan Clifford, how can you not fall in love with this guy? I mean, he really is something else. I know we've talked about Some of the concerns regarding the first base situation. Obviously, it'll all work itself out, in my opinion. Whatever direction that they end up going, but it's really, really encouraging to see at least somebody in this system with legitimate plus power, which you can say is a 60 grade or 65 grade power from the left side. We've talked about left-handed hitters in that way. I really do like the guys. The three outcome hitters, I'd say, is something that is more something that you see these days. Obviously, it's a model that has done well in the postseason recently. We've talked about, Kyle Schwarber. We've talked about, guys like Jock Peterson, guys like that, the three outcome guys. I'm not saying that he is them, but it is an approach that can do a lot of damage if you protect it properly in the lineup. And, he does not chase that much. He walks a lot. The strikeouts, there's some swing and miss in that way, but, this is something that could definitely develop. And if you see somebody that doesn't chase and maybe you need to have him make a little bit more contact, the guy's only 20 years old. He's 21 years old. So he's very, very young. I mean, he really could improve in that way. And you can polish it off as to somebody who maybe could be a 30 home run bat in the majors, which I think would be freaking awesome. How he fits into the whole roster, we'll see. I'm obviously not putting him in that. I feel like when you look at some of these prospects and you see them live, you see them do some things in the minor leagues or in spring training, I feel like Mets fans are a victim of it. And sometimes maybe I am as well, where they don't really pump the brakes on things and they see things and they react to it very, very quickly. And they already start planning their celebrity endorsements. Like, it's just at some point, like, let's slow it down, let these guys develop. Let them play. Let's see what they've got, and we'll slowly move it up. If he's ready, he's ready, and that will be that. And I can say the same thing about somebody who is hitting very well in spring training right now, that everyone's ready to jump on and say that he's a future franchise player now, even though we've seen plenty. Not talking about anybody in particular, but I'm just saying Boston Barrow, somebody I wasn't very, very well known about. I've known about his well-struck discipline, but it seems like he's grown into his frame fairly well. Nice to see that home run as well. From some angles we saw, it was a very quick bat. So very, very impressive. They talked a little bit about Carson Benj, not me, by the way, a different person. Carson Benj, they've talked about, him definitely trying to learn how to pull the ball in the air, but the plate discipline is 100% there too. It was nice to see Parada get some decent results. Let's just say that. But, as a catcher, we'll see what his future is there. But it was good to see these young guys play. Somebody mentioned Jesus Baez, who was not in this game. So I know that he was recovering from an injury. What else is new? We had so many injuries last year in the farm system. But I guess he just was not put out there. We know that Drew Gilbert was not in the game. Braden Sproat was not in the game. Blade Tidwell did not pitch. Nolan McLean, like you said. Barrow's swing reminds me of Nimmo. I saw a lot of people talking about that too. I'd say that Nimmo's a little bit more short, but I get where you're going at that. Maybe it's just because Nimmo is just in a bigger frame now. But Boston Barrow definitely has that type of Nimmo build. I'm pretty sure he's like 6'2", 6'1", like he's definitely near there. But as for, everything else we saw in this game, one thing I will say to the MLB, this was very poorly presented. Let's just say that. Obviously, it's not just the StatCast situation. You couldn't even see pitch count on StatCast. Like, that's how bad, like in the MLB, I think they were showing it on the broadcast or whatever. But once you saw that and once a new pitcher came in, it was gone. Like, that was it. So I literally had to put in this stat line on our graphic as total batters faced. I couldn't even put pitch count in. So this was not presented well, in my opinion. And it should have been better. We know that but the Nationals, sometimes they don't even televise these guys, but it just seems like there's no StatCast in general. And Boston Barrow, like I have said, he is 6'1". So similar, let's just say that. But from both sides, it was a impressive day. It was definitely, and you don't take much of it into account because it's an exhibition game. But it was really really nice to see. Um, but I think that when it comes to um, you know this going forward for baseball, this is obviously an awesome concept that I love, of all the prospects playing. I kind of want to see it be like a 3 game series, something like that, where it's like three games in the same stadium, and it's kind of like that because I feel like it would be a decent taste of these young prospects, and we can kind of see like kind of a 3 day period, and then they can do like that, because like the all spring breakout team after 1 game is kind of like that's kind of like whatever. Like you have one good moment, all of a sudden you're on the team. So a 3 game series, I feel like would be pretty cool. Obviously, with the Mets farm system, there's concerns of the injuries that we had last year, so hopefully they don't in those exhibition games. But I feel like that would be a good way to showcase it in that way, and also you can throughout spring, it gives a little bit more leeway of less guys on the bench at major league camp, and the major league guys can play a little bit deeper into the games as spring training goes along. I think that would be a good idea. But this 1 game, it's great. I think it's a great concept, and I hope that they continue to keep doing it. Seems like it is very, very popular. We saw around the league a lot of the top prospects put on a show. So this was a good thing. If there's anything else that you want to add in here, because this was very, very fun. A lot of different stories. Let's just say that lots of young talent on display yesterday.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of time, the young talent is the future. So you should want your audience to be aware of who's on the way and like what guys are coming up. Because, like you said, when the season actually starts, you don't really see minor league baseball. You really have to go out of your way, pay extra. Like it's not just easily accessible to actually watch these guys. So to actually get to see them in general, what was really nice to see. And I like your point about the whole series thing, because think about somebody like Carson Bench, who's not going to start where Ryan Clifford starts, who does not going to start where
Yeah.
Jet Williams starts. It's like you get to see guys have to face competition that are more advanced than them at a different level. Like that's a really good thing. As like I'm a player who's in single A, but I'm facing triple A talent. So that definitely is something that is pretty interesting, that you get to for once kind of combine all these different levels all into one,
Yeah.
and turn it into something. So that definitely was pretty cool, because at some point these guys you hope are all on the same team. So it's just kind of like you hope a little bit of foreshadowing. They're like, oh yes, Clifford and Jet Williams and Carson Bench, they all will be teammates on the major league team, and Jonah Tong is going to make it start. So it's just kind of good to maybe see a little bit of the future in the present.
Yeah, it's really cool in my opinion. I mean, I kind of like model it a little bit out as kind of what NHL did with the Four Nations this year, where it was like a small amount of games, but they were high competition at kind of like this same level of these minor league guys. And it was awesome. Like as a hockey fan, it was awesome to watch. The action was awesome. And with this youth, like the young guys, the shiny new tool that a lot of people like to talk about as kind of a negative thing, where Mets fans want to bring up everybody at this point. You get to see the young talent. You get to see the speed on display. You get to see the power on display. You get to see all of these tools represented. I feel like like a 3 game set, or like a something like that. Add in a home run derby, and you got so many different you know ways that Major League Baseball can do it, and the way that they can broadcast this thing, it should be a little bit better. Promote your game. We should not have to say that to this league. And anyways, I do want to talk about some other stuff in the realm of the Mets pitching staff. There is somebody who in spring that we have had many topics of discussions on, that there's been some noticeable dip in velocity, that being our closer, Edwin Diaz, who in spring, it's been it's been odd seeing him pitch, not just because of just the overall control of the strike zone, which, again, we've seen him have those in and out issues. But there's been some inconsistency in this way. And I do want to talk about this in comparison of, level of concern here. And I asked you guys in the poll of what your level of concern is. But I do want to do a little bit of a comparison because obviously strictly velocity is not just the full-on way to look at it with Edwin Diaz. Compared to what you saw last year, which was also not his best year coming back from injury, things were grading out pretty much the same way. Overall pitch shape, where we're talking about the fastball, the slider, he just needs to locate it properly. Same amount of velocity from last year on average. We were seeing a little bit of a difference in induced vertical break, but that's fine from his arm angle that he has. That actually helps him either way. Similar in the realm, let's just say that in specifics, it's all grading about a little bit in the same as from what he usually does. But from these 3 spring appearances that we've had from his fastball velocity, it is sat 94 to 95, top 97 on March 6th, on March 9th, 95 to 96, top 97. And March 13th, we saw 94 to 95, topped 96 miles an hour. We all know that Edwin Diaz has topped 101, 102 before. We've seen 103. I think it was 102.8 as his hardest ever pitch that he has thrown. Obviously, the velocity has been down as compared to what he had in 2022, which was the career year for him. We saw these latest reports on March 13th and March 15th. Anthony DiComo said that Edwin Diaz's fastball velocity was down today, which was March 13th, which was the last appearance that he made, an average of 95 miles an hour, maxing it out to 96. And his final final fastball was at 92. But manager Carlos Mendoza expressed no concern, even calling today's outing encouraging. He said it'll come up. I'm not worried about that. Carlos Mendoza did give us a update 2 days later on the 15th, saying that Edwin Diaz, Danny Young, and Ryan Stanek all threw minor league reps today. Diaz was up to 97 and continues to feel good, so there's no issue there. So that's what we heard from Mendoza. I feel like it's very, very easy to overreact to spring training because we haven't had baseball in a while. Here's the thing, and I will ask you exactly, Frank, exactly what I asked you guys in the chat. Is there a strong level? Is there a small level? Is there a minimal level of concern when you look at this? Or are you just kind of seeing where it goes? It just, I'm seeing the same pitch shape, but it's like the overall effectiveness will 100% go down if the velocity is down. It's not just like, overall that way. But I don't know. It's been a weird look so far from Edwin Diaz. The control we know is in and out of the angle he throws at, but I don't know what to make of this, to be honest. It's kind of half and half with me. I don't know about you.
Yeah, no, I would classify it as the somewhat concerned, and I think more so because when you're looking at what happened more so during the regular season of 2024, and like we say, don't want to overreact to spring training, but now that it's 2 years removed from the injury and you're not seeing the velocity increase, that is a concern because this is a guy that before the injury, he was over 100 at times. This is a guy that you were seeing touching over triple digits occasionally. So it just kind of feels like, after that massive leg injury, like we talked about earlier, Mauricio, you generate power from the lower half. It's like, will his velocity ever reach that point again? And now that you're 2 years removed and you're not seeing any big time increases, that doesn't bode well. And I think in general for Diaz, he's had a lot of inconsistencies. I mean, even this past season, you saw that where like he's good in April but bad in May, good in July but bad in August, then he's good in September. So he's someone that is going to go through ups and downs. He's going to have his slumps, so to speak, where he's going to blow some big saves, and we're going to say, "Oh, we need a new closer. He should lose the closer role," and everyone's going to flip out. But that's kind of the Edwin Diaz experience, unfortunately. And this year is going to be very big because of the whole opt out. So,
Yeah.
you want to just see Edwin Diaz pitch well for the Mets' sake, just so he's a big part. Like we know that if Edwin Diaz is pitching well, the Mets are a much better team. I mean, that
Yeah.
has been the case throughout his career because you saw when he wasn't here, things were rough. And the years where Diaz was bad, the Mets were bad. So it all kind of correlates. And for me, it's just like I want to avenge. I hope, and it's like I said, will it ever come back? Because if it doesn't, I want to see him maybe make some adjustments because when you are mostly just a fastball slider pitcher, you could get away with it when you have that exceptional velocity, but if you don't have it anymore, you need to make an adjustment. Because you don't want to become like we talk about a thrower where you're relying on velocity to be your success. You as you get older into a pitcher,
Yeah.
you need to make adjustments as you're getting into your 30s because whether you have an injury or don't have an injury, velocity is going to come down at some point. So when that point comes, what kind of pitcher are you going to be? Are you going to stay with the same approach? Or are you going to try to add in some new pieces? Like, do you add in a changeup? Do you do something, a sinker? I mean, you might have to change it up a little bit. So I am curious to see if it comes back. Now that's 2 years. That's not a great sign, but it was a really bad injury. It was a weird injury, and it's just something that it happens, unfortunately, to players. It's one injury, and you're not the same player. He's still been effective. He's still been good, but not what he was, and not
No.
what he's getting paid to be.
Yeah. I really, I really don't know what to think because again, if I'm talking about the overall effectiveness of the stuff's still there. But like the velocity is obviously in addition to that. With the fastball, and obviously the slider is, I mean, world class level, which is something that he uses. But like you've said, those are the only two weapons. He's going to have to, complement them somehow. I don't know if adding in any pitches is really going to do much, only just because of uh, how he is, his pitches are just kind of designed, to be honest. Like they kind of do a roll of off speed and breaking stuff at the same point. Obviously, with his slider pretty much being like that gyro type of cutter, so you're gonna have to have a huge reinvention in that way if you were to do that. So I feel like adding another pitch from this perspective of just Edwin Diaz strictly, I don't know if that's going to do anything. Maybe it's something that it is down the line, but again, with the velocity, if he says he feels good, I'm gonna believe him for now. But if we start to see this clocking out at 93, 94 to end off some of these guys, I don't know if the 92 was a misread, and it was a slider that he just mislocated. But again, these are things you point out in spring training where going into the season, you most likely will have a decrease in offense. You usually do, with the weather being cool up in New York. And you're going to need the pitching to definitely walk a little bit more of a tightrope than compared to the stretch down the stretch of the season. When we start off the season, and we're going to be talking about the reliance and how we can rely on Edwin Diaz. If this starts off rough, we've seen things spiral before. It's not like we haven't. Right now, my concern level is pretty much at the same as you guys here in the chat. 11% of you guys are saying that you are very concerned. 44% of you and 44% of you are saying somewhat concerned and not concerned. So I don't know if it's just Mendoza kind of talking it up and saying he'll be fine. But if he feels good, he'll feel good enough to rise the velocity at the current moment. That's how I feel. And hopefully it somewhat comes back. But it's not something that I'm going to say that isn't in the back of my mind as to where maybe this injury is just it. Like that's basically just what this type of pitcher he's turned into, as to where he's not in that top tier of lockdown reliever anymore. He's still good, but he's not, the 2022 level. He's not the 2018 level that he had. And listen, reliever consistency is not something that we see often. It's not something that maintains. So when you see that, a lot of things stacked against him, it does rise for concern. Obviously, this is my guy. This is my number one guy. I have been in his quarter forever, and I'm hoping that he is able to, rise up from it, and he's able to progress. We saw him touch 101 last year. We saw him touch 100 last year multiple times. I think the hardest pitch he threw last year was probably to that Kyle Schwarber strikeout in the NLDS. I think that was the hardest he threw. But we saw upper 90s before. I don't want to see him try to force it. If it effortlessly comes to him and he's able to progress in that way, and who knows, maybe the next outing he comes out here, he's touching 99, we see 98, we're fine, we get the swings and misses. It's still very, very early. But I will say, hearing 92 at the end, when I saw from Anthony DiComo, crossing my fingers that it was a misread and it was a slider, obviously. But hearing that from Anthony DiComo, and I heard 92, and I'm like, ooh, oh, that's not good. that is not good, because again, his slider in the low 90s as well. If those look similar to each other in speeds, then he's going to just continue to miss a lot of spots, and he's going to get tattooed in that way. So, Carlos Ortiz saying Diaz will be all right. I'm hoping that he will be, and I don't have a huge panic in my mind, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, this is something to look at. This is something to pay attention to. And if it progresses to something that is a little bit more concerning, we're going to have a little bit of an issue. We will. But I have faith that he can reach the triple digits again. Obviously, the slider is his main focus, of course. But I don't want him to force it, because we also saw him forcing it last year and ended up going with a shoulder impingement and had a rehab assignment as well. So don't force the upper body. Let the lower body come to you, and hopefully, the deception will all wear off, and he is able to be the elite reliever that we know that he is, from that arm angle and ridiculous vertical approach angle that not many pitchers have in this game. So we'll see. I don't know. There is a spot of concern, but I don't think that there is a massive look of concern as to where we're screwed. I think that at some point it's gonna come, but it's something to look out for. If there's anything else that you want to add, because this is a big part of our team. It really is. I mean, he is very important. He's one of the most important guys on this team to contribute for us to have success.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to spring training, you would hope that the focus is more so mechanics, more so pitch break, location, command, not really trying to go all out, throwing super hard, trying to see what velocity you could reach. That should not be the goal of spring training. So maybe when there is adrenaline and you are in the LDS against Kyle Schwarber, the 100 will pop up. But generally speaking, when it comes to spring training, like you said, I don't want to see a shoulder impingement. I don't want to see obliques or anything like that. I wanted to make sure that he feels ready to go and that everything is going where he wants it. So I'm more so with him, especially, I want to see location, because I don't want him to come into the game and first pitch is going to the backstop, because there's plenty of times with Diaz where it's like when he comes in, based on the first couple of pitches, what kind of outing it's going to be. So I just want to see him get as much consistency as he can. We know he goes through slumps.
And you don't have your young catcher to go out to the mound for this one to start off the season.
No,
so.
your real pitching coach is not healthy. So definitely is not what you want to see. Because when Hayden Senger is back there, he's not used to catching Edwin Diaz. So that's something that they have to consider too.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it all gets established, but who knows? But as for other things in that bullpen, I do want to say, obviously, AJ Minter getting back into the swing of things, that's great. Reed Garrett is somebody who could maybe get a few high leverage innings if you do see Diaz struggle. Dinel Nunez made his spring debut today. Obviously, they're going with kid gloves, of course, but he also is somebody who could maybe move up if Edwin Diaz ends up struggling in that way. They definitely have a deeper bullpen. It's gotten better every single year, especially in this Cohen era. They've definitely tried to build around Diaz in that way. So hopefully there's protection, and hopefully they can wrap this thing up and shorten the game with Diaz. But there are other options there who have come into the ninth inning before and can face the heart of the order. Which we've seen Edwin Diaz come in for like the eighth to face the heart of the order before. So we will see how it is. This is a $102 million reliever, so you obviously want to protect him with the best. And hopefully this is not something that we have as much of a discussion of during the season. I am hoping that we don't. Now, as for things that we are discussing for the right now, I want to get into everybody's favorite segment, and that being studs and duds. One player that has done well this week, and we want to give some flowers to. One that has not, and we would like to say that we want a little bit better from you. Let's just say that. Obviously, this has been an eventful, rough days in terms of the injuries, but we have had some decent performances. We've had some rough performances. Frank, I will go to you. We get closer and closer to spring training, so I think right now we can get a little hot-headed about these. But your stud for this week in spring training.
Yeah, I'm going to give it to the guy who made the start today in one of the games, and that was Griffin Canning, who I was pleasantly surprised to get 4 and 2/3 innings, 1 run, 9 strikeouts. That was big. A lot of swings and misses. So the guy who, like we said, one of the worst pitchers in the league last year, I said, if that was one of the worst pitchers, why in the world would you sign him? To see him put together a very strong outing, and there were some Rays regulars in there, Josh Lowe and some others, Taylor Walls. So, there are plenty of major league players in here. So to see him have that kind of success, I thought that was very encouraging. And it's something that they were going to need with the Sean Manaea injury, Frankie Montas injury. You need some other guys to step up. One of the other things we heard from Carlos Mendoza today, position battle, Griffin Canning, Paul Blackburn, McGill, they're probably all making the team too. So if Canning is going to be on this roster, in what role it is, whether that is bullpen or starting rotation, you want him to be playing well. So to see him generate that many strikeouts, I think that's a good sign. Like we talked about pitching lab, reclamation projects, getting better bounce back seasons out of some players. I hope that Griffin Canning could be one of those too.
Griffin Canning, I was very, very impressed from today. It's been impressive so far. Seems like the velocity is up a little bit of a tick as well. But I've talked about induced vertical break before with fastballs. Now, Griffin Canning's fastball is his worst pitch, and the overall fastball usage, they kind of tweaked that down from him because some of the fastball location is not great. I've talked about induced vertical break before, and he was averaging today, as this is being recorded, 16 inches of induced vertical break, but he got up to 17-19 at one point today. So it's not like there's things that aren't being applied and tinkered with. We'll see how that does against the full major league rosters come regular season time, but so far it's been a very, very impressive look from a guy like Griffin Canning, and we're going to need him a lot more than we expected with these injuries to Montas and Manaea to start the season. As for me, I'm going to go with the guy who left the game early. He's had a phenomenal spring, Jesse Winker, and we've talked about his approach being applied to this team. The offense has been very, very slow in spring. Let's just say that, and I feel like we need to start to see some other stuff from other guys to kind of start to pick it up a little bit. But Winker has been one of the consistent guys. He has not really been giving you much power, but he's getting a decent amount of extra base hits. We know that he has a great amount of discipline. This guy just never has a bad AB. And, hopefully he's back in the lineup as soon as he can be with this calf tighten up or cramp or whatever. We avoided the worst, and we know that he is going to be in that DH position for a majority of these games. So we will see. As for some duds, we have also seen some stuff that has not been great. Frank, I will go to you, right back to you on this one.
Yeah, I have to go to your guy here. Rough day today. Jose Siri, 0 for 4 with four
Oh,
strikeouts. So that was not what you want to see, him facing his former team. And speaking of former teams, what was the deal with the Tampa Bay Rays today? Mike Vassell, Cole Sulser, Eric Orzi, like every former Met.
trolling.
It was a
It's
bit
some
of a
trolling.
troll. I mean, every former Met, the Rays used them against the Mets. And Jose Siri, coming from Tampa Bay in the Eric Ortiz trade, going over 4, he got off to a great start this spring, hitting a bunch of home runs. But when you look at the totality right now, hitting 129, and we don't expect him to hit for a high average, but 129, that's oof. He's good. He's good defensively, thank God, because that is not
Yeah.
great. So he has power occasionally when he hits the ball, but as we see, over 4 strikeouts, he just needs to hit it. So when he's
Yeah.
not making contact, he's not helping offensively.
Well, and that's the one part of this where I bring in, if this type of stuff you see from Jose Siri during the regular season, you have Tyrone Taylor as well. So it's not like this is being full time, it's being shared time. So it's really all hot hand because it's not a platoon. They're both right handed hitters. So we'll see how that gets developed in. Kodai Senga, rough outing for him a few days ago. It seemed like some of the plus pitches were on display, but it seemed like he just was getting hit hard. They said that he has some new pitches. He has like a sinker or something, or I don't know if it's like a soft splinker or something. They were talking about him having new pitches or whatever. As long as he's healthy, I'm not going to overreact to this one. But I was expecting, him to have a little bit better of an outing and go a little bit deeper. He had to come out, and then they put him back into the game. He didn't have his A stuff at all. But I'm sure that we will see him start one more time before spring training is done, and hopefully it's better that next time. I'm not really concerned, but it was just not a sharp outing for him. So he obviously goes into that dud category.
Yeah, and I'll just
For
add one
some
point
other
with
stuff,
Senga, as
yeah,
far as Clay Holmes being named the opening day starter. I that could have just been that Clay Holmes has been great, and Carlos Mendoza said yes, he's earned it. But I feel like we have on this podcast have talked about Senga being the ace of this rotation, and if he's not getting the opening day start, and somebody like Clay Holmes, who is now being thrown back into rotation after not being there for a long time, I don't think that's the greatest look. But then again, I mean, Senga's not this guy who's been there year in year out as a proven ace, so he doesn't have that reputation. It's like, oh, this is your ace no matter what. This is your opening day star no matter what, even if he has a bad spring
yeah,
training. So I think that when we look at the way last year went, particularly the struggles in the playoffs against the Dodgers, now you add a not so great spring, adding some new pitches that to me, I don't know how that's going to work out because they are very slow and kind of we'll see how that works out. It's like not really ephus, but it's just something different. I
yeah.
just don't know if it's necessarily needed. So I am curious to see how it ends up going with him. And he's another one too, like we talked about with velocity, still not quite there as far as what we want. So I'm not overly loving what I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how he gets into the swing of things because he did not have a spring training last year. We did get a report from Tim Britton earlier today about Clay Holmes being the opening day starter. They said the Mets plan to go with a pair of right-handers in Houston, most likely Tyler McGill and Griffin Canning. David Peterson is in line to start the series opener in Miami, followed by Kodai Senga. So Kodai Senga would be the fifth pitcher to make a start. I don't know if that's just the sake of it being a six-man rotation and they're just trying to like gap a day into it. But with me, it's all about really who is available, because I've talked about it. I don't think pitching rotations even exist anymore at this current point. But again, we'll see how they piece this thing together, whether they go with a 6-man rotation to start the year or not. You're kind of dwindling in the options, of course. But I'd say that with Senga, I don't know if it's just a slow pace, but we're seeing a lot of slow paces with a lot of different players. So at some point, someone's going to have to eat the innings, or someone's going to have to go out there. It's not like we're going to have to put somebody invisible on the mound and nobody pitches, and because that's not going to work. So we'll see how all of this gets tidied together for opening day. Maybe we have a different view on it next week. But we're getting towards the end here of spring training. We have one more spring training episode of this podcast to go, and we are 99% expecting a special guest to come on next week. So stay tuned for that. I feel like if there's anything else that we can touch up on, because I feel like there's been a lot of just news with the injuries, with the injured list just starting to get a lot bigger as compared to what it was before spring training started. And we're getting closer and closer to that day, but I feel like we can cut this episode short only because that there hasn't really been many things deep to get into. But Frank, if you have anything else that you want to mention, because there's tons of reports that we've continued to get every hour. Like it just continues to just sprinkle in and out. It's overwhelming in spring. Let's just say that.
Yeah, I mean it's news every day, all day. What to be concerned about, what not to be concerned about, what roster moves are going to be made. And listen, they have exactly a week left. So, like we said, there's still some things that are being kind of finalized. Who is the backup catcher? What guys are going to be in the bullpen? Like we said, is Donovan Walton going to be on this roster? So, even though we are late into spring training, we're still not all the way there as far as what we're going to see come opening day in Houston.
Yeah, we'll see how they do construct this, because obviously they have injuries to work around. So we'll see. But I think we are going to end it here, end it short. Unless there's any breaking news that drops in the next 5 seconds, we will wrap it up. So for those of you in here, thank you guys so much for watching. We hope that you enjoyed the conversation. For those of you watching or listening on playback, you want to join the conversation live in the future, make sure to subscribe to the Mets Weekly YouTube channel. Turn on those post notifications to know when we go live. Make sure to follow us on X and on TikTok. Follow all of us individually, including our third co-host, Andrew, who is not here today. And also for the listening platforms, it goes up at 9 a.m. the following day of recording of this podcast. And make sure to give us a 5-star rating. That would be very, very nice if you like what you guys are hearing. Shout out to everybody in here who came through. Odd Villain, of course. Chad, Carlos, L Browsing as well in the chat. Douglas Barnes, Stanley, Daniel earlier on. Guys, shout out to you guys in the live chat. And we're wrapping things up this last week of games before opening day starts. And we're all excited to see some baseball that counts, that we have not seen for quite a while. But other than that, we will see you guys next time. Let's go Mets, and enjoy the last week of spring training games. We'll see you guys.